The Mill. A Raised Rainbow Fick. I wish I could remember what led me down to the riverbank that day. Maybe I was thirsty. Maybe I wanted to skip stones. Maybe there was no reason at all. Personally, I like to think it was the hooves of destiny that pushed me to the water's edge, but then again, I'm not sure. Whatever the case may have been, I went to the riverbank. In the end, that's all that really mattered. I was standing beside the river, watching the water collide with the rocks to create a thundering rapids. There was such a beauty to the rapids, powerful enough to suck you under, yet still retain the unfathomable elegance that water just seemed to have. It's no surprise to me that ponies still get lured into the old river, only to be swept away by its currents. It's so mighty and at the same time so compelling. I still feel the desire to go for a swim when I head down that path. It's a stupid urge, but an urge nonetheless. It was while I was watching the water careen that I noticed a reflection. Something wooden jutted out of the tree line, its lower half caressing the water and its upper half tickling the tree limbs. I turned my head, convinced I was just seeing things, and saw this large wheel. The water rushed against it, ramming into its body with a seemingly more intense force, and the wheel spun, an insistent, irritable squeaking coming with each rotation. I moved close to the wheel and noticed that it was attached to a large stone building, a mill. It was clear the mill had been unoccupied for many years. The stone it had been constructed from was weathered and moss-covered. There was only one slanted window in the front, glassless, and the doorway lacked a door or hinges. I wasn't an expert in architecture, but even my young filly mind could tell this building was ancient. Of course, being a silly filly that I was, my house to the side of the building had once belonged to a brave knight in shining armor, and I had imagined the interior of the building was filled with skulls and pelts of manticores, goblins, or whatever else that knight could have slain. That theory was quickly disproved. The only forms of life, past or present, were cobwebs in the corners and mouse holes on the walls. Still, despite its obvious age, I felt compelled. The structure was still beautiful, and it was still in good enough shape that, with a few patched holes, in addition of a door and windows, it could be occupied. I had fixed up some things in the past, most notably that old tree house on my family's farm. I had always considered myself pretty good at it, and so I decided to give it a shot. There was no harm in trying. That's how it started. Just a decision made on a whim, with no real expectations or foreseen consequences. If only it had stayed that way. The mill had proved to be in need of a lot more fixing up than anticipated. The whole thing was as structurally sound as a piece of lint. Several times I was in the middle of patching a hole when half the roof decided, right then and there, it wanted to kill me. How it did succeed is a miracle. But I weathered a storm. While it was difficult and dangerous work, a voice in my head told me it would all be worthwhile in the end. The hardest part was keeping it a secret. I knew that if my sister and my brother found out, I'd have to stop. "It ain't safe," they would say. "I feel they shouldn't be doing such things." And I knew I wouldn't hear the end of it, so I made sure to stop by the creek and ran near the apple orchard every evening. I'd scrub away the dirt, paint, and blood, and I'd grew my mat of my fur in such a way that it would hide any cuts or bruises. After I was sure that I was relatively spotless, I would head in for dinner. My family's suspicions were never piqued, and for that I was thankful. Hiding my solo adventures from my friends was another difficult task. Well, we had made a pact that we would attempt to earn and eventually earn our key marks together. If they caught wind I was going out on my own, crusading without them, they'd throw a hell of a fit. Unlike my siblings, my friends grew suspicious. They'd catch me walking out of the forest late in the evening, battered and bruised. They'd ask where I'd been, and I'd say I was just going for a walk. They would ask why I was covered in scratches, and I'd answer I'd fallen through a thorn bush after tripping over a rock. While I wasn't the best liar in the world, it was convincing enough. They'd shrug and go on their way, and I'd breathe a sigh of relief and keep working. Getting the materials I'd need was both the hardest to accomplish and most difficult on my soul. Being on a farm, I was surrounded by materials I needed to fix up anything and everything. Crowbars, hammers, screwdrivers, wood, carts, you'd name it. I had it all at my hooves, just waiting to be picked up. However, they weren't my tools. They're my family's tools. And I wouldn't be stealing, but borrowing them without permission was still a big no-no. I would have to ask, and I knew that my request wouldn't go without question. They'd ask what I needed them for. They'd ask where I'd went. and I wouldn't be allowed to go anymore. It was a lose-lose situation. I was forced to choose between the sanctity of my soul and the mill. I chose the mill. The mill took months of grueling labor to refurbish, but I managed to do it, all alone with no help from any pony. Something in the back of my head told me that even then, that nobody would ever notice my hard work. The mill was too far off the beaten path. One had to actually go off trail through the woods to catch a glimpse of it. Yet, I was still satisfied. I did this for myself. Somebody else noticed it and liked it, good for them. Maybe they'd use it as an inspiration for a painting or a song. Maybe they'd see it and decide to turn it into something useful, like running a mill that could produce things. Or maybe it would stay enshrouded. I didn't care. The mill was my pride and joy. Nothing could take that away from me. I wiped the sweat off my brow and limped my way back into town. I grumbled and winced with each step. A misjudged step on the path of the mill had led in a twisted ankle. While cuts and bruises could be hidden easily, hiding a limp would be near impossible. But I bit my lip and kept moving, and sweat and tears mixed, hopefully convincingly. And I walked rather normally by the time I emerged from the forest. The sun was setting in the west, covering the sky in a brilliant sea of red and orange. I stopped to admire it, and that was my mistake. With a shout, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo shot out of the bushes. They had done this many times before, so much so I didn't even jump in surprise anymore. Whose raised they pointed at me? Questioning glares etched on their faces. A sea of generic questions spewed from each of their mouths.
Where were you?
What were you doing?
Why are you limping?
What the hay is on your flank?
That last one took me by surprise. My eyes grew wide, wider than Scootaloo's at the time, and I turned my head. I cried out when I saw it. My voice cracked more than Sweetie Belle's when she had made the observation. Yellow hair was no longer so occupant of my flank. A hammer and paintbrush now resided there as well. My cutie mark. A tidal wave of emotions cascaded through my brain. Excitement, fear, sorrow, reject, and joy. I had finally done it. I had finally earned my cutie mark. Yet, the most prominent emotions were the negative ones, the ashamed ones, the frightened ones. I couldn't look Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo in the eye. To do so would bring me face to face with the ponies I had wronged. We had a pact, and I just broke it. Earning our cutie marks together was supposed to be our tether, something that kept us connected even when we grew older and farther apart. The intent of mutually acquiring our cutie marks was what brought us together, and it was what was going to keep us together, and I had ruined it. Without so much as acknowledging their ragged breaths of muttering of what, I lowered my head and shrugged toward Sweet Apple Acres. I knew that when I got there I would be found out for a heathen, found out for a liar, found out for an unapple. The shame weighed down on my heart, and I started to limp again. The Apple family had a history. If you were an apple, a true apple, you'd have an apple cutie mark. Even if you were meant to be an accomplished actor, an apple would appear somewhere on your flank. That was the mark of a true apple, and my flank was without it. At first I had hoped that it was a matter of perception. I hoped that the lighting was just too dim for me to see the apple, or the apple was located in a spot I couldn't see no matter how far I cracked my neck. But that was just wishful thinking. As I bent over the creek to wash the grime and tears off my face, I caught a reflection of my flank. It was a hammer and a paintbrush, and nothing else. Not even an apple seed. I felt the sudden urge to end it right there, as crazy as that sounds. Not even fully grown, not even out of school, I considered drowning myself in the creek. But, at the time, I was lost and confused. I knew that nothing good was going to come from this mark. I knew that nothing good was going to come out of walking through the front door of the house. I knew that nothing good was going to come out of tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that. And I knew I was wrong. Or at least, what tradition said was wrong. I wasn't an apple. I doubted I was even a pony. The hurricanes of emotions and thoughts carried from civil twilight to absolute darkness. They'd be looking for me soon, and I debated whether I should give them the benefit of finding me. The lights were still on in the farmhouse, and I could barely see the silhouette of my sister's hat as she paced in front of the window. Her loud, twangy voice audible for nearly a kilometer away. I bit my lip, and I started to cry again. What am I going to do? I looked up at the moon. It was brighter than I could remember it ever being. To this day, I don't think I've ever seen it as bright as it was on that night. There was something comforting in it. A glow that embraced me and told me that things were going to be okay. While it didn't console me completely, it was enough. I washed my face off in the creek one last time and marched towards the house. They were on me as soon as I opened the door. Scolds, questions, hugs. Big Mashintab had me wrapped in his forelegs so tight I could barely breathe. Things settled down after a minute, and questions became more decipherable.
Where were you?
What were you doing?
Why are you bleeding?
What the hell is that on your flank?
I didn't lower my head this time. No. I raised my chin as high as I could, made my flank as visible as possible. If they were going to hate me for what I wasn't going to give them the pleasure of damaging me. They could disown me, they could sling their rocks and insults, but they would not have victory. I wouldn't allow it. Applejack bent down, furrowing her brow and squinting her eyes, and looked. She looked at the mark, then looked at me, then looked at the mark, then looked at me. Just fire the damn gun already, I thought. Stop with this hesitation and put me down. She stared directly into my eyes, her own tidal wave of emotions evident in her gaze. This was it. This was the moment everything crashed. She laughed a genuine laugh and pulled me into a hug. The air was knocked out of me, partly out of the intensity of Applejack's embrace, partly out of complete shock. This wasn't the laugh of a bully. This was the laugh of a friend. The laugh of some pony who loved me.
You got it, Apple Bloom! You finally got it!
She choked out, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I looked at her perplexed. "You ain't mad?" I asked. She looked at me with her own perplexed expression.
Why the hey would I be mad?
As I sighed, I pushed her away lightly. I shook my head forlornly and looked at the mark. "Look at it, Applejack. Notice something? Notice something not there?" Applejack tilted her head and placed the hoof under her chin. She stared at it for a long time, too long for my patience. "There ain't an apple, Applejack. Just a hammer and a brush." I fell to my knees shaking. I'd promised that I wouldn't give them the benefit of breaking me. But breaking promises seems to be the only thing I could do at the moment. "I ain't an apple," I sobbed. I ain't an apple." I sniffed and hit my head against the floor with a loud thunk. My tears seeped through the cracks of the floorboards and flowed through them, much like a river. Then Applejack embraced me again, shushing me. Then I felt the strong forelegs of my brothers wrap around me as well. Finally, I could feel Granny Smith's frail hooves on my back, trembling with age and emotion.
You are an apple,
Applejack whispered in my ears.
and you're my sister, and I love you. Don't you dare think otherwise.
I began to cry again, but this time it was an actual release. No fear, no anger, just release. Things weren't going to be bad, or at least, not all bad. I still had to go talk to Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo, apologize for breaking our pact, as well as apologize for marching off without an explanation. Whether or not they would forgive me was a mystery, but on that night I didn't care. I was hungry and tired. Words could be said tomorrow. To this day, the mill stands unoccupied. I considered moving in there from time to time, but I quickly brushed it off. Although I feel I did a fine job sprucing up the place, the mill ain't exactly the most comfortable house. Besides, nothing can change what it did for me. And while I'm thankful I stumbled upon it, I feel the most respectful thing I can do for it is just leave it be. It's fine, just the way it is.